if Elon Musk is able to implant chips into people's heads, it will be hard to compete if you don't, as a species have dual purpose. They can be used for creative and good, and they create tremendous potential for us. But they can also be used for detrimental activities.
The collapse of civilizations come through this competitive nature. It's because the competitive nature requires one part of civilization to suffer extremely for the other to benefit.
Our inability to cooperate as one of the core issues for our species. Deepfake videos, photos, voice can already be created, and it will become easier. You won't need a huge studio to do this. Anyone can do it. And that will, again, if not erode truth, it will dilute truth.
Welcome to Compassiviste Dialogues. I'm your host, Ali Horiat. My goal in this program is to educate our audience about various global issues and how we can help. Today, we bring through our dialogue the author of the Dystopian Utopia, Carl M.A. Arden. Carl, welcome to the show, and thank you for sharing your thought-provoking book with us. And thank you for your appearance and talking about the greater issue of the things in your book. I want to start with asking you, prior to this book, how did you know that you want to be a storyteller, an author of books?
Well, first, thank you very much for inviting me to this podcast and also for helping me working book. So actually, I mean, my interest for telling stories and writing goes way back. I think I would go back to age around 10 was when I started writing my first essays, and I had a teacher in I guess it would have been sixth grade, seventh grade, that inspired me a lot, and made me write different essays, and again gave very meaningful feedback to them. And I think I've felt since then that writing was something I wanted to do. But as career turned out, I've written a lot in my career, but not creatively. I had plans to become a journalist, especially I had interest in being a foreign correspondent, writing reports from other countries. But again, life had a slightly different turn. So this has been more of a interest on the side. I have started writing books before, but this is the first one that I've taken all the way. And I've had quite varied topics and themes that I wanted to explore and still do. But this is something that lies close to my heart.
And so before we get into the book, what other books have you begun writing? I mean, what themes, what concepts speak to you?
I think there is something deep about what we call it, the nature of man, maybe, who we are, what we do. And I think within that theme, interest about good and evil, what we are as how do we say, a species, I guess. Mm-hmm. And our moral capacity and what makes us good or evil. That's been one I think recurring interest when I look. But I think also given my professional background, I think some big macro questions also about how to build a sustainable world, how to set up political systems that can further cooperation, especially between nations, if less so within, equally important. But I think a lot of the problems that we face are insufficient cooperation between countries and cultures. So on that level as well. And I think the dynamics between actually the individual and who we are and the macro is a topic that I've also taken great.
And how does the professional sphere that you're in support what you're trying to put into the world through the creative part of yourself?
I think it's inevitable, probably, that you are shaped by your upbringing, your education, and your professional exposure. So I worked in the Foreign Office in diplomacy for a short stint. I've served in the army. We had a compulsory military service, so that was something that I had to do. But an experience that taught me a lot, I would say as well. And then I've worked a lot, as mentioned, in finance. And I think that, again, inevitably shapes the way I think about a lot of things. And if nothing else, there is the cost-benefit analysis. There is a trade-off of everything we do and every choice we make. And how to make those choices. And then, of course, it's very complex what you weigh in to that cost and that benefit. There are so many soft values that you can put into that equation, which makes it much more complicated. But still, the thinking of trying to maximize the benefit in to me, some Benthmite way, I think, if we're looking philosophically, the maximum happiness for the maximum people. But what does happiness mean? Then it gets you into a lot of complex questions, and what costs can you take? But that thinking comes back actually to my background, I think, and so cost benefit is one, and risk return is another, which comes back to the book that we're discussing here. So really, what are the risks of certain progress that we've been making as a species, and considering those as well. And then I think also in terms of looking at the future, I've done a lot of forecasting and looking future gazing, but maybe more from a professional and again finance point of view. But that goes into looking into uncertainty, and that I think is also something that when I look at the future of our species, as I do in the book, all those uncertainties coming together and not being single one. It's scenario analysis that is interwoven. They interact with each other and create different risks. So in risk analysis, in some way, risk return and cost benefit, but in a much more complex way, because again, what you weigh into those equations, if you will, can be very complex. So many factors.
Okay. I get exactly where you're coming from, because I come from a finance background before I literally quit and restarted my life. And what you're saying is really music to my ears here. But I want to hold off to some of the responses and some of the engagement to let the audience first know what we're talking about, because I've read your book and I don't always read books completely. I kind of skip through a lot because I feel a lot of times the concept, you can get a book's concept from reading parts of it. But I'll be honest, with yours, I started reading, and then the next thing I know, I'm all the way at the end of the book. And then I spoke with the director at our publishing house, and I said to her, I said, "Wow, this is something," because this is exactly what's happening. And I'm not going to give it all away, but I'm going to let you tell the audience about the book and the plot, and how you put this together.
So I think maybe sort of brief background. I've taken interest, as I said, in nature of man, and from the single unit to the totality of our species. I've always taken interest also in the well-being of us as a species, but see great risks to that. I've followed several institutions that are involved in the studies of existential risk. There is one in Oxford called the Future of Life Institute. There is one at MIT called the Future of Humanity Institute, or actually the other way around. Future of Life is in
MIT.
And looked at the risks that our species face. And I think there is a theme going through my book, which is that all the advances we make as a species have dual purpose. They can be used for creative and good, and they create tremendous potential for us. But they can also be used for detrimental activities, for negative. They can be weaponized, as it were. And with the almost exponential increase in our technological power, the risks of the negative use of that technology keep going up, while, in my view, I argue, our moral capacity and our institutional capacity, if you will, to wield such power and manage the risks of our technological creations and power don't keep pace. So inevitably, risks increase over time from the potential bad application of technology. And most primarily, I look at nuclear. I look at biotech. So basically, virology and the potential to create pathogens. And then artificial intelligence. And I also put in the context, you have these rising risks to our species, which again can bring a lot of good things to us, but also have that negative potential. And at the same time, I see two, if you will, background noises, which I view as threat multipliers or threat amplifiers, which on the one hand is global warming or climate change. It drives a lot of pressure to our world, which increases the risks of conflict of various kinds, and technology, and notably so from AI. And this is what my book is about. It's divided into three parts. The first part being what I call setting the scene. So it is looking back at how we got to where we are around today. It then looks at, in the second part, at the where we get to in the near future. So if you will, the first part is about inventing fire, if we take one, and the second part is playing with fire, the dangers of the technologies that we have invented. And the third and last part is a more distant potential future for humanity, which I call the curtain falls. And it looks at one potential outcome for our species, again, given the risks and the environment that we have created. Maybe we start there.
Yes, and I like the analogy of inventing fire and playing with fire, and you are right. I also agree that when you invent fire, it's not necessarily a bad thing. When you play with fire, it's also not necessarily a bad thing because you're exploring at that point, and in that exploration, there are problems. When you look at any exploration, whether it's space exploration or whether it's some kind of advance in medicine, there will be casualties, there will be mistakes, there will be trials and errors to get to the tech that we have. And we shouldn't discount the tech or the advances, I think, because there were risks associated, although we want to minimize the risk capacity. But the truth is there will always be risk. But again, the cost analysis you were speaking of plays into effect to see how advanceful it could be. The problem for me really lies, and that's where I really enjoyed your book, is the curtain falls section, which really outlines where we're going. Because when we started playing with fire, we didn't really end up looking at it from that from that earlier discussion you were saying, where you have that Kantian side to you, which is talking about the human and how we as a species, what our duties are, or good and bad and evil and all of those things. I think we failed there drastically, in the way you explain it. So that's really the part that really got me, because I'm reading through your book, and it's going through these stages and really outlining it. And then all of a sudden it's kind of like dropping the whole thing and saying, this is where we're going and this is why we're going here. And that's where I had to think to myself and say, oh no, this is an issue. So that's really one of the bigger questions for myself. And I'm sure, when the audience reads this, or even before they read the book, this is something that raises a lot of interest. It's why were you inspired to write this story in the first place? And let's answer that first. Why were you inspired to write this amongst all of the different things you could have written about?
Yeah, I keep a list, of ideas about things I want to write about, and I mean, interesting. Some of them are quite different from what I do here, both in terms of this being speculative fiction, as I call it. It's based in research that I do, but it takes dramatic license. It is fiction after all. I haven't had the luxury to have an academic job that is involved in this, being able to repeat that. But so some of the book ideas that are very different. But I landed here. And why did I start here? I think for any author that is not writing for strictly commercial purposes, at least, they want to write about something they feel strongly about. And as mentioned, I feel strongly about the future of humanity, as I'm sure most people do, and therefore I hope it's something that a lot of readers will take interest in, relate to. I do that as a father, as someone who adores nature, but also as someone who sees so much potential for humanity. But while I see that potential, I see limited evidence of us safeguarding that potential and containing the risks that I see to our species. I believe we've come to a point that is quite dangerous to us in human history. One author that inspired me to be Ord, he wrote a book called The Precipice, and this was about really a point, as the name suggests, where we can make it over the precipice, but we can also fall down on either side of it. And this is something that I connect to and agree with. We've created strong, very tremendously powerful technology. And I think especially with the rise of AI, that can accelerate even further. We've also democratized that power. That goes for biotechnology. It goes for social media and the risk for fake news there, for example. But in most areas of technology, we've made it much more accessible and available to more participants and even persons with less expertise.
Mm-hmm.
but then again, we haven't been able to garner or increase our moral capacity or institutional power in the same way. And I think when you look at the world as we see it develop, and I could point to Ukraine today and what's happening in Gaza, and I wouldn't even make political judgments. One can do that, but that's not the point. The point is that we do have these conflicts. One way or another, we cannot, after 300,000 years of human existence and 3,000 years of recorded history and experience, we still cannot find peaceful ways out. Only now we're equipped with much more dangerous technology in the shape of weapons of mass destruction. This is, I think, at the core what I want to look at in this book. And because one thing is also I've read other work that inspired me, but they tend to focus on maybe one area. And I see that as complicated as it is, the task is to look at totality. So I'm trying to make something really cross-disciplinary here, looking at different trends, social, technological, political, economical, and how those come together and can then create a risk environment that we struggle to deal with as a species. And again, going back to who we are and what we do, why that is. And in my case, I arrive at our inability to cooperate as one of the core issues for our species. We're on a small scale in our local communities, our tribes able to cooperate, but on a higher level or higher units of analysis, we are competing. It has been said that a species cannot be both intelligent and competitive at the same time and make it through. At some point, that will lead to conflict with itself and existential risks. A species can be intelligent and cooperative, or competitive but not intelligent enough to create big enough risks against itself. But we have, at least so far, proven ourselves quite intelligent and creative, but also competitive in a way that makes us a danger to ourselves. And again, this is such an important theme and something that is close to my interest. So that's the story I wanted to share, and from where we are today, what one potential path for us to avoid these existential risks.
And again, you speak as a spokesperson for Compassiviste, really. I must say that, because a very simple example of my own space in what you were just talking about. I used to be trading Forex and gold in the finance world, and oil and a few other commodities. And, when you speak of competition, when you speak of conflict, when you speak of all of that, for anybody in this world to make money, we need disasters.
Mm.
You just don't, gold is not going to go up or down unless there is some kind of chaos in the world. It's, that's how gold moves. That's how currencies shift. If everybody's happy and doing well, and we're using the technology to make everybody happy, and to satisfy everybody's needs and minimize suffering, and everything's on this very flat line of content, then there is no reason for fluctuations. And so it doesn't happen. I realized I used to anticipate problems for income. You see, on a very small scale. I mean, not on a macro level, not on a global level, but just imagine you have some money saved up and you opened a trade account and you said, you know what, I feel like this Gaza situation is going to get worse and it's going to expand. So I'm just going to buy gold now when it's at, 18, 1900s an ounce. And I'm going to wait until it hits $2,800 an ounce and sell my $10,000 that I've put in there. And what are you anticipating, really? You're anticipating the problem growing. You're not anticipating a solution. You're not anticipating, bringing your energy towards a resolve of any kind. So I noticed that about myself very quickly after leaving finance, that a lot of what we were banking on was, there hasn't been an earthquake for a while. Why? And those things shift the markets, you see. So from one end, when you say yes, it's the collapse of civilizations come through this competitive nature. It's because the competitive nature requires one part of civilization to suffer extremely for the other to benefit. And as you compete and as you rise, that beneficial group tends to want to amass more of the benefit and the privilege for itself. And so it becomes smaller and smaller until it becomes, a monopoly. And that's where even competition dies. And that's where really the whole thing falls. And I appreciate that you bring in this perspective, because it is through the collective that we can make change, and it is through bringing the forces together to say, as you said, 3,000, 5,000 years of civilizations that we can kind of point to, and to think that we are, especially taking Gaza's without any judgment, taking the situation in Gaza now. I mean, we have films made that are 1,000, 2,000 years old in the film's history, reproducing wars that happened over that same space. And we're still in that situation today. And to think with all the technology, like you say, that the advancement to this situation is still the same way, only so much more dangerous, because our weapons keep advancing and our morality doesn't. So this inequality you bring to light is really eye-opening, thought-provoking, because you generally hear of inequality from the financial perspective of, the haves and the have-nots, and less people have more money now, and all of those things. But not a lot of people are coming out and talking about our technology is advancing at a massive scale, but our morality is just not advancing in that way. And so there's going to be problems in that. Now, having said that, the dystopian utopia sheds light on that from one angle of technology with AI. And I first want to ask you briefly how you think AI plays into our current space and our current world, because over the last, you started writing this book, and obviously you experienced the explosion of AI over, even the last few months, never mind the last few years. And so you must have be having these thoughts as you're writing, as you've written the book, and you're looking back at it and saying, wow, this just accelerated so much faster than I was thinking. So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, to be honest, again, I have a full-time job and I have two kids. So I've written a lot of this in late evenings, and sometimes in cafes, sometimes in airport lounges. So it's taken some time, which creates its own sort of complexities in terms of keeping structure together, because the time sort of spreads your production in a way. But it also, especially when you create something that is looking into the future, which I think almost per definition has shorter shelf life, depending on how far you look into the future. I think if you look really far and get on a meta level and philosophical, then has more, again, durability. But to get back to your question, when I started writing this, I had not really heard of generative AI. So, the likes of ChatGPT and Gemini, that was not something that I was aware of. And then I guess somewhere, I really learned about it 1.5 years ago. I'm not sure how long before that it's been around, but that's when I learned about it, and that obviously set some new trajectories itself. That it does, so it becomes almost a living project in that way. But as I said, it will maybe move in different ways, the way you see that technology and artificial intelligence develop going forward. But I treat it in my book, on the one hand, maybe more specifically, but on the other hand, more generally. Like global warming, it's a background noise that changes the risk environment for us and changes the overall environment for our species. And I mean, do I think that what I describe in the book will, necessarily transpire? I think no. As yourself, you worked in finance. I tend to think in terms of scenarios. There are a lot of potential paths into the future, and here I'm picking one of them and highlighting one that could happen. But again, there are a lot of different ones. But I would say, almost as to me at least, a technological law is that AI will come. It will become more advanced over time. And then some of the effects that I look at in the book, which drives the sort of final destination, if you will, of the book, I think they will happen. It's a question of when. So if you would look at will AI replace human beings in the workforce? I think it is full agreement that on basic jobs, yes, they will. My argument is that in time, and it's hard to project how long that time horizon is. They will replace any job. I'm working in finance. You worked in finance. What I do is optimization. Basically, I try to make sure we use the resources in the most efficient way and get the most out of those efficient resources. I try to make sure we manage our risks, that we are transparent in a way that is also optimized. Regulation on the one hand, but on the other hand, what we sort of have to and should disclose. So yes, I think in any field, really, if you take it to the extreme, AI will replace people, which leads to one of the themes in the book, or one of the trends, which is the rise of a idle class of people, which is a problem not only for people not having a job, but really lacking a sense of purpose. More than they do today. I mean, people have been replaced doing physical job by physical machines, but they've moved to intellectual work and kept their purpose. But once that's not needed, then you have another sort of level of problem. I think another trend is the lonely man, if you want to say that, which is that AI also reduces our human-to-human interaction. It replaces human contacts. AI gets better and better, but that also leads to an increased sense of isolation and loneliness in people. I think our merger or merge with machines is also something that is inevitable over time, and I don't want to get into talks about cyborgs, but I think machines will become more like us, and that is to help us more. Siri or Bixby or whatever, Amazon, Alexa, they're all trying to become, and they will become more like us, to help us more and to make us feel more comfortable with them. And at the same time, we will become more like machines, and we will need to compete. That there is no other way around it. If Elon Musk is able to implant chips into people's heads, it will be hard to compete if you don't. So there will be a convergence, I think, also where we become more like each other. Will AI erode truth, which is another topic that I list as one of the trends, which will partly at least determine our future. And I think here, yes, unfortunately, that's also almost inevitable. Deep fake videos, photos, voice can already be created, and things will only improve, if you want to use that word, maybe the wrong term, but it will become easier. You won't need a huge studio to do this. Anyone can do it. And that will, again, if not erode truth, it will dilute truth. It will be harder to find among all the alt truths that are out there. And then I guess, we see Terminators, a popular sort of science fiction driven questions. And here also it's a contention in my book that I'm quite convinced that we will. At some point, maybe we will even see humanoid infiltration units speculated in some movies. But what I say, it's not going to be the machines that will hunt us, as I see it. It will be machines, but it will be driven by people. It will be man inventing terminators to use against other men, one tribe against another, because again of the great coordination problem between countries. Inventing the atomic bomb, while rational for one nation in a particular context in history, for us as a species, as a collective, for any alien looking down at Earth was, in my view, absolutely moronic. It just increased risks and indeed contributes to existential threat to our species. But for each single actor, you could argue that it's was rational. It becomes a game theoretic bad Nash equilibrium, if you will.
Yes.
What's rational for the individual is not rational for the collective. And similar, then going back to circling back to the Terminators. If again, we don't need to mention any countries, but in a current conflict, one of the sides could use Terminators rather than send their own soldiers in. Would they? Probably. And at some point, unfortunately, I think they will.
We started with drones. I mean, that's what drones are,
yes.
right? I mean,
yes,
it's warfare of this future. If we go into maybe not too far distant, maybe 1970s, 1980s movies, you will see sci-fi drones being used, and now all of a sudden it's a reality.
Yes. With limited degrees of autonomy, and I think that's an area that will just grow. I mean, still, I think most of them are controlled remotely and working on optics on remote. But again, the technology will keep improving, and you will have more and more autonomy. And it's you can try to regulate these things, but the level of trust, which again goes back to this great coordination problem and our failure to cooperate, is so low that if one superpower says that we're not going to develop autonomous weapons, then someone else will, which means that the first one has to develop it anyway, and we end up with a suboptimal equilibrium again, or Nash equilibrium.
And you know what? I'm going to share something with you here. When you brought up the atomic bomb example. And I went through, so I did an economics degree, and then I did a lot of schooling because I didn't know what to do with myself when I was younger. So I stayed in school. And when I did my master's in political science, and then I did a postgrad in conflict resolution and international relations, my thesis was titled, "What if Kuwait exported potatoes?" And this was at the time of the Gulf War. And I was born in Dubai. I was raised in Europe and North America, but I was born there and I spent considerable time there. And so when I was traveling back and forth at this time, the first Gulf War, I was, getting close to graduating high school. And it was the first time in my life in Dubai that you see, soldiers walking around, American army, and you see all this like conflict state. Because prior to this, I would hear as a young person about the Iran-Iraq war, for example. But it was further north of the UAE, it was a few countries north of us. But there were a lot of Iraqis and Iranians in Dubai at the time. And so you would hear about the conflicts and things in the news, and it was within the region. So you heard about, but you never saw it. At the time of the second Gulf War, it really became a powerful issue, and it became something that the whole region got somehow involved in. And this was also at a time when, September 11 had happened, and it threw all sorts of diplomacies it threw a curveball at diplomacy, so to speak. And here I am in Canada, walking into my political science master's, being from the Middle East. And in the first week of class, when people are introducing themselves, I'm the only Middle Eastern person in the class in Canada, sitting there staring at everybody else. And on the screen, there was September 11 happening just as class started. And everybody is just glued to the TV. And then I remember everybody looking at me and waiting for an explanation, waiting for me to say something, because, this was me, basically. That happened for 2 years throughout my master's. And when I talked about, this is exactly what I brought up then. And this is, over 20 years ago, I said, cooperation. I mean, you guys want money, oil money. You guys want oil money. That's really what you want, in North America. And the oil is sitting in our field. And there has to be a way that we can all benefit from this oil without people killing each other for it, or without all this, conflict for it. Is there a way? And unfortunately, when you say the cooperation is not there, I think part of the reason the cooperation is not there because the education is not there. I'll tell you why. Yeah. When I was, set to defend my thesis, there were 5 people sitting there who were going to, kind of grade me. And I had a lot of problems with, I'm not going to name names, but I had a lot of problems with the professor who was basically in charge of my case. And I knew that because he kept on negating a lot of what I was saying. And he started calling me things that I didn't even understand at the time. He said, "Oh, you're a realist." And I said, I don't know if that's a bad term that you're throwing at me, but I'm speaking the truth. And this is how it really is happening. And so when those 5 people came out, I basically said to them, here's a piece of paper and a pencil. I would like you to each write the names of 4 political figures from the Middle East that you have read or you've studied or that you have learned from what the situation is here and how this situation can have some kind of collaboration and cooperation with the West through these minds, through these advocates, so that we can have a peaceful resolution towards wealth and the building of wealth. And I said, if you guys can do that, I will leave my paper, I will leave my thesis, I'll walk out of this school, I don't want my degree. But if you cannot do that, you don't deserve to sit there and grade me, essentially judge me on my work, because you don't know what my work is about. You don't have the educational capacity to judge my work. Would you be sitting on a panel judging a medical student? No, because you don't have a medical license. But how do you have a license here, which is, I don't understand. And that is why we don't have cooperation, because you have power. You don't need to educate yourself because you can control with your power. We don't have power. Even if we do educate ourselves, it doesn't help. And so these kind of reactions happen. This kind of violence happens. And what I was trying to say is, you educate a little, bring that education over and support the systems here a little, and everybody kind of rises together, reduce the competition, and you have a resolution. But when you look at it individually as our national interests in the United States or our national interests in such and such country, as opposed to the other country that's in the conflict, obviously there's not going to be an amicable presentation. So when I was reading what you were writing, I was thinking to that, and I was thinking a little bit because, when discussing the issues of the future with AI and how quickly it's advancing to these dangerous heights because of the lack of, I wouldn't even call it control, but the lack of purpose in the sense of where it's going. I mean, you have ChatGPT with all of this power right now, and you think to yourself, you say, okay, what are we purposing all this power to? There are people sitting there, their job is to improve this AI continuously every day. They go to work at 9, they leave at 9, And for that 12 hours, all they're doing is improving the chat GPT. What I want to see is, where is the office that is saying this is the moral purpose of how this will benefit not just humanity, but the entire Earth, or potentially even further. That is not coming in parallel. And when that's not coming in parallel, it creates conflict. And so had we had that education grow and that purpose grow for humanity and the world as a whole, I don't even think that building the atomic bomb for that one country in a game theory setting would even make sense, because they would see how this retaliatory effect would affect the whole of the box and the squares within it. Because in the distant future, now you have 5 other countries that have atomic powers. Now, for example, let's just assume Iraq did have those powers and the Americans did attack because of that, and they were able to dismantle it even. But you still had to go through all this conflict to do that. How many times are you going to successfully dismantle this, even if it did exist? I mean, you're worried about Iran today. You're worried about Israel today. You're worried about Pakistan today. You're worried about North Korea today. How many more countries are you going to be worried about over the next 50 years? And if it doesn't go, the superpowers way all the time, what really is going to happen, right? I mean, is there a solution there? So I think it is very dangerous. And I think, and I like how you are not advocating that AI is going to become this human with its own mind and take over and destroy the world and kill humans as a purpose. Because I think a lot of people are pushing that kind of narrative, again, in a lot of miseducation and a lot of misinformation, and with potential disinformation thrown in at that. But the truth is exactly what you say. It's when a group competitively thinks of its own advantage versus the whole, it will make those decisions to create the technology that will respond to the best interest, essentially the profit maximization model of its own unit as opposed to the whole.
Yeah.
Right. And so if, we have the technology today, as you say rightly, to create all the necessary tools to have a world where we can dedicate this to a minimized suffering of humans and other animals as well, and restore the environment and help the healing process. But for this to exist, a two-part question. Do you think it can exist, first of all, within the social structures that we have? Because at different times in our history, I mean, in recent history, in this context, Westphalia, the agreement, the treaty, and where that led to in terms of sovereignty and nations and all of those things, and all the way to pacts and treaties that are happening today, even environmental treaties of countries. Do you think that within this system and within a socio-economic order of today's version of capitalism, not the original birth of it, where innovation was supposed to be purposed to the whole? So essentially, it was a social structure in the beginning, and then it became this anti-social structure towards the individual. Do you think that within our systems today that we can generate technology in a productive and proactive way to progress for the whole of humanity and the whole of the planet? And before you answer that, the second part of what I want to ask you is, what world do you see us living in if we need to advance this in a way, if we need to advance technology in a way that can support us in the face of our existential issue?
Very, very tricky questions, of course, which makes them interesting. I think maybe first on your first question, I mean, is it at all possible to advance the necessary cooperation in the current, socio-economic geopolitical environment? I think it is extremely hard and therefore extremely unlikely. I think on the one hand, what makes any system resilient and strong is actually, diversity. You have different models. Let a thousand flowers bloom, if you will. So, on the one hand, I want different cultures. I want different economic models. I want different technological paths going forward. I think that there is one author that I've read, Nassim Taleb, who wrote a book called Anti-Fragility, which is a lot about how to make systems, again, resilient and sustainable in a way. You need, you cannot concentrate them too much to one place, because that makes them vulnerable. So on the one hand, that's what you want for prosperity and sustainability, resilience to risks. On the other hand, I think that's unfortunately also, given our incomplete capacity to feel compassion beyond our close community, and therefore really strive and make sacrifices for people that are not immediately close to us. With those limitations, I think this world of different systems, different cultures, is unlikely to generate a stable outcome. It can, while technology is limited and the power of technology is limited. So we cannot hurt each other too much, which a large part of our history was like that. Greeks fighting the Trojans, or at that level, some horrendous battles between people that should love each other but didn't, because they were enemies to each other. They invented in one story or another, but at least the damage was contained. As we sort of again increase our technological power in biotechnology, in atomic energy, in AI, in chemical warfare, the downside risks just increase, and at some point it becomes unsustainable. So therefore, I struggle to see that diversity that I in a way want, because it's better and it generates different ideas. But then instead you need the opposite. You need what has been referred to as a singleton. I think Nick Bostrom at the FHI used that term. So this is where you actually have a central, what word to use, apparatus or some norm-setting entity. It doesn't need to decide on a detail level, but it needs to set the rules for all of humanity, so that one tribe cannot renege or cheat on the common understanding to gain its own advantage. So concretely, no tribe can advance autonomous weapons beyond the norms accepted by the Singleton. They cannot advance nuclear weapons or biological weapons beyond what the central authority, if we call it that, agrees. So I think that's what you need. There are obvious risks of that as well. That to enforce the norms, the rules that it sets up, the framework, it would need some power, and that power ultimately, maybe sadly, but unfortunately, doesn't come just from persuasion. That can be the first resort. But after diplomacy, it's the use of force. And once you equip a singleton with the use of force and power, it becomes also a big risk to
it becomes tyranny.
It's a tyranny, exactly. I mean, it's in economics we sometimes speak of the need for a benevolent dictator to
yes.
Right. I think it was Arrow or Kenneth Arrow that I maybe misremember, but in this case, again, that's what you would need, but that would come with sort of risks clearly of its own instead. And I mean, going back to your question, will our current fighting tribes be able to agree on such a singleton? Unlikely. I think that's very unlikely. In my book, obviously, that Singleton actually comes basically from AI ultimately. So ultimately, AI not being the doom of humanity, but to some extent, at least saving humanity from itself.
But at what cost?
Correct, at a huge cost, and that's the first sentence I think in the introduction is that
Yes.
What if you could solve all problem of humanity, climate change, wars, conflict, disease, but it comes at one big cost, which I don't give away in the introduction, but it's the cost of our how do we say real freedom, because we then enter into all of us into a virtual existence where we can all be as greedy as we want. We can all consume as much as we want. We can be wherever we want. We can have whatever culture we want, whatever religion we want, and all be successful in our own ways. And even if it is true, as some would argue, that we cannot be or humans cannot be happy in a world without problems, without conflict, because it loses our sense of purpose. We could have that in the virtual world without anyone actually suffering from it. So you have all of that, but again, at the end of the day, it's all only in our heads. It's not actually there. We're lying in an incubator, as I call it, which is the dystopian part of the utopia of having everything in a way we could wish for.
I spoke with a game developer recently, and we were speaking, and he was telling me something very interesting that got me really thinking deeper after that conversation. Is I don't know if it's so much that we want a world where, or as you mentioned, humans cannot live in a world without conflict or issues and stuff like that. It's more that we like to have conflicts that we win. And that's a thought that really got to me. It's that we love conflict, but we love winning in conflicts because we are raised over, these 3,000 years that you mentioned earlier, to have that legacy. I mean, Alexander the Great is a great figure of history, but why is Alexander the Great a great figure of history? Because he overcame conflicts. He won. He continuously won. Why are we so... why do we have thousands of books about the Mongolian Empire? Look at what Genghis Khan did, in terms of not losing. So a lot of it goes there. But then you look at some other empires, and maybe they're not so well mentioned or well read, or there aren't that many movies made about them. You have, for example, the Persian Empire and its golden years, or the Arabian Empire. They call it the Islamic Empire, but it's a region, so I don't know why they call it by religion. It should be called the Arabian Empire or the Persian Empire or other regional empires. They went through these great years of astronomy and medicine and so many things that they brought to the table of humanity. But then one of the biggest movies that we have is the film 300, of a small group of people who dared to stand up against a conflict. So it's always this will we have to win. And so the game developer was telling me the reason these games do so well, these warring games and these games where you go in and you're this superhero and you battle and you kill people and stuff, is because you have this continuous hit, basically like a drug, that allows you to win and win and win in every conflict. And when you lose, it's okay, because like you said, it's virtual, so there's no damage done. You go back and you press replay and you start all over again. And you keep doing this until you win. And as you're in this process, you're just getting this high continuously. And then you start over again and you get the high again, and it keeps going. But in the real world, in a world where it really affects people, you cannot have a Singleton, because that Singleton will have its own dictations, will have its own purpose. And that purpose may not do well for others. I mean, an example of Singleton is colonialism. An example of Singleton is a tyranny. And when you think of some of history's tyrannies and some of history's systems of such Singletons within their capacity and region, they never worked. because the will of the king was not the will of the people. And unless the king can suppress the people, eventually Moses is going to show up and save the Israelites, right? So that story repeats in history, whether it was the pharaohs, whether it was the French Revolution, wherever it was, there was always this revolt. So it doesn't work. And nothing will work insofar as we have borders and we have, all of these divisive systems. I mean, true inclusivity, true diversity, a true field of letting all the flowers bloom mean that, you cannot have a tulip garden in the Netherlands. You cannot have a rose garden in the Netherlands. You have to have all the flowers in the garden. Is the Netherlands willing to allow a field of all sorts of wildflowers, or is it going to say, no, we're going to weed those out because the benefit to our industry is tulip. So we're going to stick with this. And so what happens to all the other flowers? All the other flowers are out. Simple as that. So you cannot have diversity if you have a border. You cannot have inclusivity if you have a border, because there's always rules and regulations of sovereignty within that border. And that border is always going to act with its own interest versus the growth of the world around it. So when I ask you, do you believe within these systems that we can advance? And you say highly unlikely. What is your answer to this? I mean, you present in your book this, the virtual world and the way we hand over our singleton power to AI and say, look, we are too emotional or we're too sensitive when we make decisions. So we're not good people for decisions because our mind is not developed in that way. But you've only been programmed to make the best decision actually from an existential perspective. So we're going to give you the keys. You take care of the world. We'll lie down in the incubator. We'll have dreamy days and let it happen. So essentially, it's kind of, to me, it feels kind of like a person who says, I've given up. This world is just not working for me. I'm going to go and sit in that corner there, play my guitar, smoke weed, and whenever I die, I die. Because in that continuous state, I'm happy. You see? But there's no progress. There's no hope in that continuous state, right? So if you had to start part 2 of your book and say, what comes after? What is your solution after all of your experiences, military, diplomacy, where you are now, family, having 2 children, and really thinking about what happens to my grandchildren at the rate of this advance of technology? All of these things taken into consideration. What do you say?
Wow. As you say, that's a whole sequel to the book, which is probably going to take another 3 years. But I think...
But I want, the reason I ask this is, Carl, is because I want the readers to read your book, not with this sci-fi imagination in their heads, but I want them, you call it fiction, I don't. I call it awaiting reality. Just because it is not now, it doesn't mean that your speculation becomes automatically fiction. And that is what a lot of industries want to sell you as. Your idea is sold as fiction in many bookstores around the world because, God forbid, we show what really can happen. That is the danger. That is the risk. But if we show Star Trek as fiction, people will even go to the convention and never think of what could happen in our future.
Yeah.
So that's why I want people to kind of get a deeper understanding of you in the sense of, what do you think we should do when we read your book? How do we react? What is the future that will work according to Carl Arden?
Yeah, well, I think maybe tying back to what you said about the Singleton, and I mean you're spot on. I think in what I'm trying to say that we have never been successful in having a Singleton. We probably never tried it sort of in its entirety as an institution, etc. But I mean it's always failed because of the imperfections of the institution or person that would execute that office, if you will. But here, there wouldn't be a person or a human-led institution that would be the Singleton. It would be a super machine that is far beyond the intelligence that we can even imagine at this point, with a objective function that we have ultimately created at least the frames for the guidelines, and then it can optimize within that. So is that sort of a possibility potentially? I guess part of that parameters would be to be sort of minimum intrusion and more maybe what people should not do than force them what to do. So setting limits on developing anything that could cause harm to other human beings or other life indeed, or our planet. Now, if we then would look sort of how could we end up in such a scenario in a different way, and as I say, that's a very big theme that I would actually like to very much enjoy to tackle in another book. But I think at the core, if you go back to the problem as I see it is again our inability to cooperate outside our close community. As we know, competition is a tremendous power as well. I mean, you speak about our desire to win in computer games, but I would say win anywhere. When I entered university, I studied in the UK. I was applied for a degree called Economics and Management, and I was asked to write an essay. And the essay topic was don't remember exactly the formulation, but is human an economic or social animal? And that was to start an economics degree basically. And my answer was that it's a social animal first and foremost, but then our social status, which is very important, is partly determined by our economic achievements and success. Of course, one needs to take a broad view of what success is, not only pecuniary or monetary, but a lot of other achievements that are valued, artistic and spiritual or otherwise. But whatever it is, it's ingrained in us deeply, the drive to win, as you say, but to gain social status. And that's going then even deeper. I would say that there is a greed that almost is unsatiable in humans. And I think when you say greed, people only think of material artifacts and money, but one way or another, I mean, greed is there. It's somewhere behind divorces. People want sort of a better life with someone else. It's behind conflict. People want more land or what have you, and of course material things as well. So if that is ultimately behind our sort of problems to really cooperate, then at somewhere there you need to start. And so I would say you need to arrive at a level of relating to our human beings, which is different. And I mean, quite frankly, I use the word compassion in the book, but that's really that you don't put your own interests so far in front of your other. Is that sort of achievable? Well, I think we should start from what I would call like this universal Hippocratic oath, how the doctors take the Hippocratic oath, which you can translate in different ways, but one easy way is like do no harm. And starting there for people, really to live by that, not to do harm to other people or other life, I think is on some fundamental level, besides tapping our intelligence so that we can't invent destructive weapons of mass destruction, then that's sort of where we need to start. And can that be then translated into a silver rule, meaning don't do unto others what you don't want them to do unto you, and maybe even a golden rule after that. Then from there, it is possible to sort of, I think, root institutions that would be cooperative. And don't get me wrong, I believe in competition as a creative force, but competing within frameworks of that do not cause harm to other people or other life. Very vague, but somewhere along those lines is where I would start. I would want to preserve our spirit to win, as you say, and to compete. But as the soccer teams do in the European Championship at this point, playing with rules and without sort of hurting each other, but producing better solutions together for the benefit of everybody. That will then take a gazillion rules and regulations, or maybe not principles, rather norms about how to interact and how to distribute.
Wait! I want to stop you. I want to stop you there for a quick moment, because you mentioned euro, and do you think that the rules and regulations actually play a part correctly to support this growth? Because I'll give you my take. Italy played Croatia, and I think the added time should have been 4 minutes. A lot of the world agrees with this. The added time was 11 minutes. There was a goal scored on the 10th minute. Croatia's out, Italy's in.
Yeah.
Was this sport in this game played by a certain rule structure? No, because there was some power given to the referee to call the game time. There was no AI that calculated every time the ball stopped automatically and every time it's restarted automatically and positioned the game back, right?
Yeah.
And so this power became the sensitivities I'm speaking of. We never know. We will never know why the referee decided to add 11 minutes.
No.
To change the course of history. Now, this is just a game that, you gave the example of that. So I'm using it as a game with a specific example that happened, But the thing is, look, if Italy goes on, for example, to now beat Switzerland or the next team that it's going to play against, and let's just assume that Croatia was not going to beat Switzerland, and it changes the future in so many different ways that statistically it's just impossible to account for. So when you speak of these kind of systems, I, for one, I'm all for compassion. I mean, everything I'm doing is trying to, raise compassion in the world. But do you think that allowing this to be a human experience can ultimately bring the golden rule into behavior? Because the golden rule, I mean, it's attributed to Jesus. It's not even a Jesus thing. It has existed long before Jesus.
Correct.
It's existed long. Like you said, in our recorded history from the beginning of time, we have documentation to show this ethical and moral continuity of conversation in humanity. So it's not a new concept. And unfortunately, we are at a place where, like you say, thousands, 4 or 5 millennia later, we haven't been able to introduce this into the sphere because competition. And I'll tell you why I say competition, because you have kids. Let's take a school environment and let's say we are in grade 3. We give the kids 3 coloring pencil colors and we say, and 1 sheet of paper each. We say, whoever draws the best wins this coloring set, because that's what competition is about. It's about rewarding winners. So now one person wins the competition because they did really nice work with the 3 colors. We give them the coloring set. The next competition that begins, everybody else has 3 pencils to color with, while this winner has 45 pencils to color with. They're going to have a much more advanced, diversified version of what they're bringing to the table. And even if they lose once or twice in the whole academic scholar year, it's going to be to somebody extremely genius with those 3 pencils because they're so far behind, right? And so you're not going to get fair competition after that. So it could be that if we maintain the 3 pencil throughout the year on different projects, that person may have had their genius and their talent in displaying an art of nature, of landscape. But then another student may have been genius in, painting something else. And so you get these different perspectives of competition rising everybody together because everybody has some kind of creativity within them. But when we use competition as a measure and that measure instantly advances somebody over the other, where the other, even though they have a lot of ability, and maybe that day their ability wasn't shining, never get the chance to move forward. That creates power structures that are unequal and inequitable. Yes. And when you create that, it just doesn't go back. I mean, there's not enough money from an economic perspective that the IMF or any kind of fiscal policy or monetary policy can help Africa to come to a space where they can sit at a round table with economies like the EU or the United States to have a conversation. They are always going to be a slave economy. So what kind of competition can we bring to the table here? I don't think there is one. So in a sense, I think the more we advance competition, the more we are specifying that we're going to create the space where the group, for example, whether they're the Italians or whoever, the group that can defeat everyone in the competition gets the trophy. And then that group can be the leadership. And then, it's repeating tyranny all over again, but with a democratic flow into it this time. So this time we're saying there are rules, there are regulations, there is FIFA, there's an overseeing body, there's a Singleton that is overseeing the rules and the regulations. And within this, under the Singleton's view, these teams will play and the champion will be the lead, essentially. And that's what we're doing to the world in competition. But at the end of the day, as we see, that Singleton may want one group to win over another because the television rights, the merchandise sales, and the fan base, and many other things of one team may be much larger economically than another team. So you cannot discount the cheating aspect of competition, being that FIFA has been embroiled in cheating. Correct? So being that the Singleton body has always been embroiled in corruption. Corruption goes hand in hand with competition because when you can't win fairly, you cheat because you want to win. The ultimate goal is not how good you can do. The ultimate goal is win at any cost. So that's why we have crime, because we try to financial crimes. You're in the finance world. Why do the Bernie Madoffs exist? You see?
Yeah, I think the Singleton, as I said, I mean, in this case, in the case of FIFA, is very much human, all too human, why would they cheat? I mean, they're mostly being accused of corruption. Well, goes back to greed, I think. This is not even about, I mean, it can be, but it doesn't necessarily have to be about the FIFA member wanting Italy to win. It may be a FIFA member wanting to buy a new, seaside house or something.
Yes.
But it's sort of greed at the core of it for something more than you have. There's a problem, I think, I like reading about Stoics, and I find some inspiration in their teachings. Really, the being at peace, if you read Seneca, about with what you have. There is a big key, I think, to happiness there, but also to like social stability, being happy with what you have rather than constantly seeking more. While again, seeking more is a creative power as well for humanity. I think as a whole. So finding a tricky combination or compromise between the two. I think of your creative kids and the pens. I think something only quasi-relate, but I know there's been psychological studies speaking of rewards and winning, that when you ask one group of kids to draw something because if they do, they get an ice cream or something, and another group of kids to draw just for the pleasure of it, the first group will after a while, they will not draw anything unless they're paid for it. Mm-hmm. Whereas the other one, the second group who created for the benefit of creation and art, I guess, will continue to draw either way, which is also an interesting part, I guess, of how we, to some extent, work as people. Getting back to competition, and I think what you were on to, like an extreme first mover advantage. The kids that got the more pencils has an advantage that the other ones cannot catch up with. In a way, she has, or he has, better technology, has more pencils. Circling back to AI, that there is a book by Max Tegmark, who is the head of the Future of Life Institute at MIT, called Life 3.0, which starts with AI giving that ultimate competitive advantage. So getting a head start that no one can catch up with, because as soon as you get a little bit of head start, that can be used to get a bigger head start. And that in turn, and so ad infinitum, you can make more and more money, and with that money, you can buy more things. So I think, at some level, we would need really to, in lack of a better word, tax the hell out of, any company, whether it's AR driven or some other, by some other principle, becoming a winner takes all. It needs to be taxed, and we will need, I'm sure, speaking of my book and the idling of people, a citizen pay of some sort. So to be able to redistribute that, if a Singleton, which again I say it's an extremely hard thing to achieve, and I don't think it could be achieved in the current global structure. But if it would be a non-greedy, non-people probably based, then that could potentially design such a citizen pay and redistribute resources, because it wouldn't itself necessarily be interested or greedy. It wouldn't have been interested in seaside property or what have you.
But you know what that does too. I think, for example, the reason Apple has been so innovative is not strictly because every shareholder or every decision maker at the board is really excited about the technology that Apple came out with over the last decade. No, I think it's because Apple was able to go from a near bankrupt company to, practically the most valuable company in the world, if not the first, the second, always, right?
Yeah.
So that plays in part to the innovation. And I think if the government comes and says, any corporation that has over $1 billion is going to just lose all of it to social welfare, will a corporation anymore be interested in innovating to that extreme level, that exponential level, that it can see the rewards? Because we strictly analyze our rewards on a financial spreadsheet. We don't do it through compassion. We don't do it through social systems. There is no economics in the world today that says success equals social harmony. You cannot go to school and learn that in any school. So that being the case, the equation always equates to a certain level of economic yield and a profit maximization model, and that is efficiency in the world. And primarily that is possibly also why slavery happened, because when you cannot reduce your expenses anymore, what's better than free labor? And free labor is slavery. You cannot get better than that. So it's always looking for efficiency. And then you create social disasters that feed the economic model. In a sense, can we really achieve the state where we say, okay, we're instead of taxing people 50%, now we're going to tax the people who are making over $100 million 80%, because they don't need all that money. Will they get up in the morning and work anymore? Because what's the point of me putting all of my mind, all of my effort, start doing this startup, reaching an IPO and getting why would I be Elon Musk anymore? There's no point in being Elon Musk. It's actually smarter to earn as a CEO of a very, bland corporation that is doing something very old school, like selling bottled water, because everybody needs water. This is a good company. I'll stay here. I'll get my 800,000 euros a year with bonus package and corporate retreats and everything else and all the other extras that I get. It's actually a better income than being creative and innovative, because if I make 2 million, with the taxation system, I actually make less than working at this job. I think that also kills creativity. So my bottom line in kind of pushing you is, do you think that, because, you describe this book as a hopeful warning, and I take it as a hopeful warning. I take it as you are opening my eyes in a sense to say there are a lot of dangers and we really need a radical shift. And I think if we do need a radical shift, do we need to upend and uproot our pillars of civilization, our pillars, which are competition, which are, these economic structures that we have in place? Do you think that we can take competition and we can take, this cutthroat capitalism, and we can take these inequalities in developed and, developing and undeveloped worlds and throw them into a space where an AI Singleton can come and say, we will organize this by taxing the rich? And will the rich abide by this? I mean, why would they abide by this? Why not just shut off the AI? Because you probably own the AI.
Yeah, they couldn't own the AI. That would, how do we say?
Because right now, I don't see I don't see the AI today being used specifically for egalitarian purposes. It is being used to advance.
No, absolutely not. And that's my point of,
right.
The Terminators and
yes.
economic
that's what you say as well, right? That's what you say as well. So
yeah, exactly. But the assumption here is that by a certain, how do we say, twist of events driven by a number of trends, we start migrating to this virtual life. And that's something that allows the Singleton to step in, basically, because there is no point for whoever owns the AI to get more money. There is nothing he or she can get in the real world, which is suffering from environmental problem and a lot of risks from the technologies that we have created that he or she cannot get from the virtual world. So there is nothing, and that's a theme as you've seen in the book as well, about basically the old capitalist and the wealthy becoming ultimately equal, all of us in our incubators.
In an unreal version of the world.
In an in a way, completely equal in in the real version of the world, lying 90 millimeters or away from each other. But in their virtual worlds being as unequal as they can possibly want, and having whatever fate. Someone wants to be a Trojan warrior or a Spartan for that matter, and someone else wants to be a Hare Krishna monk in the 20th century. What have you? They can be as unequal there as they want, but again, in the real world, they're ultimately quite equal. There is nothing you can buy with your money in the real world anymore that wouldn't be beaten by what you can achieve in the virtual world. So it's a very big, stretch to where that Singleton makes sense. As I said, I think it would be very hard to achieve. It would need to be under the auspices of something like the United Nations, I think, an intergovernmental body that would set it up. And it would need to be broad framed, I think. It couldn't go into, like people argue the EU goes in and regulates details in countries. It would set up moral tenets and frames for our behavior. And yes, I mean, redistribution, I think, setting up competition rules so that a company cannot, or a corporate cannot, escape carbon taxes, if you will, as an example, by moving production from one country to the next, the way you can do this.
Or by buying them.
Yeah.
Or by buying credits.
Correct. Yeah. So yeah.
But then you need the power to do that, right? I mean,
you need the power to do that.
You give the example of the UN, and I personally don't believe the UN has the power to stop conflicts so that we can have resolutions. Going back to Ukraine, going back to Gaza.
It's very weak.
And then to add to that, you have veto powers. So again, the owner of the Singleton body will veto anything that is not in its favor.
Yeah. But again, I mean, I'm saying it would need to be sort of driven by something like the UN. I'm not saying it should be the UN, because it is weak now. It's not representing the world the way it looks, looked after the Second World War. Yes, it's being basically, incapacitated by the veto rights and the conflict inside. It cannot really agree on anything. So it would need to be something different. But I think that the concept would be that it would need to be a joint effort by countries and something supranational, not being belonging to a single organization, a single economic interest, or a single nation. And therefore, again, it cannot and should not be too invasive or intrusive. It should set those broad frames. And where, you draw the lines between the broad frames and the micromanagement, if you will, of people that should be free, that is a very tricky question. But that would be the sort of, direction of solution, I think. And quite frankly, and an international court of justice that actually work, that can also enforce these principles, if we don't call them rules and regulations, the infected words, so more the principles and norms of behavior. Yeah.
I ask all of these questions because I think your book has the depth to make people really, really think in ways that they may not currently be thinking about this. And I really want people listening to take a moment. It's a very dense book, but it's not a 1,000-page book. I mean, it's very well written. I read it in 2 goes, just going through it. And the reason it was 2 was only because I started and I had an appointment. And so I had to go to the appointment and then read the rest of it. But, it's something you can really read the first time on a lighter level and go back and read it again and really pick on the points, that you present. And I really want people to interact. I mean, this is the kind of book where you come back, you come back and you interact. You come back and you speak, you find us, you find Carl, you find Compassiviste Publishing, and you say, here are my thoughts. I mean, here are my questions. Here's the debate. Here's the argument. Here's how I counter this, or here's how I agree with this, or what we can do better. Because it's discussions like this that we publish, because these discussions are what lead to the way we create tomorrow. And we just did this here. I mean, you and I, we had this conversation of where do we go? What do we do? What's the best way to do it? Now, if we have 100 million people doing the same, I think that's grounds for a change, a social change that allows people to do that. So, first of all, I want to really thank you for writing the book, because a lot of us think of things, but we don't really put our thoughts out there for the world to share with. And I think a book is still this medium of sharing our minds. So what you've done with writing the Dystopian Utopia is to say, here's my mind on this topic. It is open for everybody to come in and read my mind about this topic. And when somebody does that and they invite people, to their table to have dinner and eat from their food, it basically means, also tell me, how did you like my cooking? How did you like my food? How did you like, my house? And after you leave, please, email me and say, maybe you should change the brown color of your wall to, green. It'll look nicer. Or maybe you should put more spice in your food. Or I love the food. Can you share the recipe with me? There are many sides of the feedback, but I think it's noble of you, because that's what we need. We need people who are willing to put their thoughts out there so that people can engage. So thank you very much for doing that. And second, thank you for taking all of this time here and answering some of these difficult questions, and answering some of the questions that keep me up. And I think, and I get to know solutions sometimes, but I still continue thinking. And thanks for speaking on Compassiviste Dialogues and sharing all these amazing insights. Now, I want you to leave our audience with one quick, short thought that they can take with them and begin your book.
It's okay. I'm going to break the rule. You can edit if you want to. There's Churchill who said that, if you want me to speak for 2 hours, I need 5 minutes to prepare. You want me to speak for 5 minutes, I need 2 hours to prepare. Let me think. On the one hand, I want to say, you read through the book from beginning to end. I think also the book leaves opportunity. There are 3 parts of it, looking, where we are and how we got here, looking at how we play with fire, as I say, and then looking at the sort of more maybe scientific future. And I think also there, readers can look at these once at a time, actually. They can look at them differently. I think that's one thing. I think maybe if we want to find something crisp and how do we say, succinct, then I would say that I see it as really necessary for us to change our ways into more cooperative framework for us to survive as a species and make it through this part of our history and evolution where we are. And it's, in a way, our destiny to do that. We are creating a lot of creative potential, but so much risk. So if we don't, I think we're just playing the roulette, Russian roulette, if you will, over and over. And at some point, unless we change, that ball will fall in the wrong place.
Well said. I encourage everyone to read this exciting book, The Dystopian Utopia, which you can find at Compassiviste Publishing. Please subscribe to our Compassiviste podcast channel and share this so more people can learn of the issues raised in this book and to hear the author speak and to engage with us about what you think here. Follow us on our social media at Compassiviste, and you will find all the links listed below. Also to our authors, so you can engage with us about what you read and what you like. We're here to help change the world together. I'm Ali Horiat, and thank you for being here.